Welcome back everyone, hope you're doing great. Today we are going to take another trip through the sound barrier in another of the Cold War's many silver arrows. This one however stayed in service for an astonishing 66 years after it first entered service in 1959, only the American B-52 has been in service longer. But with nearly 11,500 examples built, it's not surprising that it lasted that long. So zip up those flight suits and climb that ladder as we go for a ride in the MIG-21 Fishbed. This month's model is the MIG-21 Fishbed from Academy Hobby in 1/72 scale with Finnish Air Force markings. It is an inexpensive kit coming in at under £7, excluding delivery from your preferred online retailer. It has 36 parts over 2 grey plastic and 1 crystal sprues, a decal sheet with markings for 2 different jets but only 1 paint scheme. However, a quick search and you can find an almost endless array of patterns for you to recreate. The instructions are a single double-sided sheet of A4 paper and fairly simple to follow if a bit busy on each step. The only bits that are a little unclear is if you can model it with gear up or down, with or without weapons and drop tanks and the painting map. Now, as mentioned, you can just ignore the suggested scheme and do your own thing. Fitment and detail are actually really rather good across the build. No nasty flash on the parts and minimal sanding to get clean joins, if at all. The only fitment issues was for the missiles to the underwing hardpoints, and the panels that go on the landing gear just sort of free float, but they far from ruin your experience of building the jet. Overall, it is a very enjoyable experience. New builders get a decently detailed aircraft without it being too complicated to build and learn how to do bare metal finishes. Experienced builders get an easy to build refresher project to do in a weekend and have a nice looking piece at the end. I will definitely try another kit from Academy in the future. Technical specifications. Type: Fighter Interceptor. Crew: 1. First flight, the 16th of June, 1955, YE-4 prototype. Service life, 1959, September 2025. Country of origin, Soviet Union. Manufacturer, MIG-21. Operators, Soviet Union, India, Warsaw Pact States, and so many more. Length, 51.7 feet. Wingspan, 23.5 feet. Height, 13.5 feet. Empty weight, 11,464 pounds. Max takeoff weight, 17,549 pounds. Engine, 1 Tumansky R25-300 afterburning turbojet. Thrust, 9,030 pounds dry. 15,640 pounds with reheat. Max speed, Mach 2, at 46,000 feet. Cruising speed, 550 miles per hour. Service ceiling, 59,000 feet. Max rate of climb, 58,000 feet per minute. Operation range, 721 miles. Gun, 1, 23mm GSH, 23 cannon. Hardpoints, 2 K-13A air-to-air missiles, for Millennia R-60 air-to-air missiles, 2 dumb bombs, 1 ventral drop tank. To understand the MiG-21, we have to go back to the early 1950s. The Korean War had just ended. The subsonic MiG-15 had shocked the West, but the jet age was moving blindingly fast. The new requirement was simple but demanding. The Soviet Union needed a lightweight interceptor that could reach Mach 2, twice the speed of sound, to catch American nuclear bombers. The MIG-21 Design Bureau set to work. They experimented with swept wings, but eventually settled on a tailed delta configuration. This was the breakthrough. The delta wing provided excellent supersonic performance and plenty of space for fuel, while the tail maintained stability that tailless deltas often lacked. The result, first flying in prototype form as the YE-4 in 1955, was essentially a rocket with a cockpit. It was small, just over 14 meters long. Its nose featured a distinctive shock cone that could move in and out to regulate airflow to the engine, a defining visual characteristic of the aircraft. It was a masterpiece of minimalist engineering. Unlike complex American fighters of the era, like the F-4 Phantom, which was heavy and relied on advanced radar, the MiG-21 was designed to be a frontline fighter. It operated under Ground Control Intercept, or GCI. A pilot didn't need a massive radar to find the enemy, a controller on the ground would guide him to the target. All the pilot had to do was climb fast, hit the afterburner, fire, and get out. This simplicity was its greatest strength. It could operate from rough, unpaved airstrips. It could be maintained by conscripts with basic tools. It was the people's fighter, an egalitarian approach to high-tech warfare. By 1959, the MiG-21F entered service, and the world was about to see just what this Silver Swallow could do. The Soviet Union didn't just use the MiG-21, they franchised it. Moscow understood that influence wasn't just bought with money, but with security. If a nation aligned with the USSR, they got MiG-21s. Production lines roared not just in Moscow and Gorky, but also under license abroad. Czechoslovakia built them. China reverse-engineered it as the Chengdu J-7, a lineage that would continue to evolve independently for decades. Perhaps most significantly, India became a massive operator, manufacturing hundreds of their own MiG-21s under license by Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. By the mid-1960s, the MiG-21 was the standard-issue fighter for the Warsaw Pact and Soviet allies. It created a global ecosystem. A pilot from Cuba, a technician from Vietnam, and an instructor from East Germany could all speak the same mechanical language. But the true test of a weapon isn't sales figures. It's combat. And the MiG-21 was about to face its ultimate test against the most technologically advanced air force on Earth. Vietnam was where the Fishbed became a legend. On paper, it shouldn't have been a contest. The U.S. Air Force and Navy arrived with F-4 Phantoms, huge, powerful, twin-engine beasts with advanced radar and long-range missiles. The North Vietnamese Air Force flew the small, single-engine MiG-21. But the Vietnamese pilots, trained by Soviet advisors, turned the MiG's limitations into advantages. They couldn't win a turning dogfight against everyone, and they couldn't stay in the air long due to limited fuel. So, they didn't try. They adopted guerrilla warfare in the sky. Guided by ground radar, MiG-21s would approach American formations from below or behind, invisible to the U.S. radar which struggled to look down against the clutter of the jungle. They would ignite their afterburners, scream up to supersonic speeds, launch a K-13 Atoll heat-seeking missile, and dive away before the Americans knew what hit them. The F-4 Phantom, designed as a missile truck without an internal gun, found itself vulnerable. The MiG-21 was hard to see visually and even harder to hit. American pilots famously remarked that it looked like a silver bullet. While the US eventually adapted with better training like Top Gun and improved missiles, the MiG-21 had proven that a cheap, lightweight fighter could bleed a superpower. While Vietnam showcased the MiG's defensive prowess, the wars in the Middle East and South Asia showed its offensive grit and its vulnerabilities. In the Arab-Israeli Wars of 1967 and 1973, Arab MiG-21s faced off against Israeli Mirage 3s and later F-15s and F-16s. Here, the results were often lopsided. Israeli training and tactics frequently overwhelmed the Arab air forces. The MiG-21's poor cockpit visibility and difficult handling at the limit proved fatal against skilled opponents. It became clear, the plane was only as good as the pilot. However, in the hands of the Indian Air Force, the story was different. During the 1971 Indo-Pak War, the MiG-21 had its finest hour. In the first supersonic air combat over the subcontinent, Indian MiG-21s dismantled the Pakistani Air Force's F-104 starfighters. The F-104 was the American equivalent to the MiG, fast and sleek, but the MiG-21 outturned and outfought it. By the end of the war, the MiG-21 had established total air superiority, even conducting precision bombing runs on runways, a role it was never designed for. Decades later, in 2019, the MiG-21 made headlines again. In a skirmish over Kashmir, an upgraded Indian MiG-21 Bison, flown by Wing Commander Abhinandan Varthaman, engaged a Pakistani force. India claims he shot down an F-16 before being downed himself. Regardless of the disputed details, the fact remained, a design from the 1950s was still dogfighting fourth-generation jets in the 21st century. Longevity, however, comes at a cost. By the 1990s and 2000s, the MiG-21 was showing its age. In India, a series of accidents led to a grim nickname, the Flying Coffin, or the Widowmaker. High landing speeds, difficult handling, and aging airframes took a toll on pilots. Yet, air forces weren't ready to let go. The airframe was just too sound. Upgrades like the Romanian Lancer and Indian Bison fitted these vintage jets with modern radar, helmet-mounted sights, and deadly R-73 missiles. These Super MiGs could see and shoot as well as modern fighters, even if they couldn't fly as far. But time waits for no plane. Romania retired its fleet in 2023. And finally, in a historic moment in 2025, the Indian Air Force, the faithful custodian of the type for 60 years, bid farewell to its last MiG-21 squadrons. The roar of the Tumansky engine, which had echoed over the Himalayas for generations, finally fell silent. Today, only a handful of nations, like North Korea, still operate the original MiG-21 in any capacity, while its Chinese cousin, the J-7, lingers on in secondary roles. But the legacy of the MiG-21 is secure. It was the democratization of supersonic flight. It proved that you didn't need the most complex machine to control the skies, you just needed the right one. It was a pilot's plane, unforgiving of mistakes, but unbeatable if flown right. If you look at the history of 20th century warfare, there are three Soviet inventions that appear in almost every conflict: the AK-47, the RPG-7 and the MiG-21. Known to NATO as Fishbed, to Soviet pilots as the Balalaika, and to the world simply as the MiG-21, this aircraft isn't just a plane, it is a phenomenon. It is the most produced supersonic jet fighter in aviation history. Over 11,000 units were built, serving in the air forces of more than 60 nations. From the jungles of Vietnam to the deserts of the Middle East, and the high-altitude passes of the Himalayas, the MiG-21 defined air power for the Eastern Bloc and the developing world for over half a century. It was cheap, it was fast, capable of Mach 2, and it was available to anyone who wanted to challenge Western air superiority. Today, we explore how a simple, tube-like interceptor from the 1950s managed to stay relevant well into the 2020s, outliving the very empire that built it. Since it first lifted to the skies, there have been faster planes, stealthier planes, and more advanced planes. But there will likely never be another jet fighter, as resilient and as universally recognized as the MiG-21. That's all for Thai.
Just a minute. Before we go, I have a question.
Yes.
Wasn't this meant to be a primarily armor modeling-based channel?
It is.
So why so many aircraft? We've had 3 months, what should have been 4, of helicopters and planes but no ground vehicles, let alone a tank.
Simply because in 1/72nd scale, it's hard to find a good range of Cold War-era ground vehicles. Most of them are in 1/35th scale, very few in 1/48th or 56th scale, and most are purely Soviet tanks, and if I wanted a NATO option I'd have to sell a kidney.
So it's just cause there are so many more aircraft models available in this scale than ground vehicles.
Yep. Purely down to availability, and that during this time frame, several times longer than WW2, a lot of really cool jets came out. You have these early jets that first went through the sound barrier and then on to twice the speed of sound, and subsonic fighters that could take off vertically like the Harrier.
So nothing really interesting happened with tank development during the Cold War.
Oh, not at all. Tank development was interesting, but the steps are a bit more incremental than huge leaps compared to airframes. But for the life of me I can't figure why there aren't more from this time frame in the smaller scales, outside of the vintage classics from Airfix, and I'm not touching one of them after the trauma of HMS Ark Royal, not for a long while.
And you want smaller scales because
I don't have the space for a large collection of 35th scale vehicles. Just doing barely a handful of tanks in that scale would have me overpopulated very quickly.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I'd love to do more tanks, but at the moment it isn't very practical right now. Can I wrap up now?
Yeah, I was just curious.
Thank you. Right, where was I? Oh yes. That's all for this sortie, viewers, and for a while, our last trip to the skies. Next time around we are getting back to the ground, in the mud, glorious mud. If you enjoyed our journey today, please do the YouTube pleasantries and check out the other videos on the channel. Until next time, dismount and brew up.